Welcome to the SSAA Victoria podcast. As we've said on the other ones we've done, these are occasional podcasts where we take a bit of a deep dive into the issues in shooting and hunting in Victoria. Encourage you, we're planning on doing these a little bit more often, so subscribe on your favourite podcasting app, or if you're watching us on YouTube, which we're on for the first time, subscribe on YouTube. That means to my two guests here, we can no longer use the joke that we have really good heads for radio, or other people can now make the joke that we have really good heads for radio, which is probably more likely. So I'm Barry Howlett, I'm Communications Manager with SSAA Victoria, so look after communications, as the title would suggest, and a fair bit of the association's advocacy program. I'm joined by David Laird, who's our Hunting Development Manager, and Daryl Snowdon, who I'll let you give your own title.
It changes daily, but let's call it Training and Programs Manager today.
That'll do. And today I've got these two gents with me because we're discussing the review of Victoria's wildlife game regulations, which is a really big bit of work that's been going on. But first we'll just do a bit of news and housekeeping from around the association. And the big news is Shot Expo returning to the Melbourne Showgrounds on 19th to 20th of October this year. I've just been out at the showgrounds this morning looking at how the four-wheel drive expo sets up out there. Really excited about the venue. We've got the exhibition centre we've got there, I keep forgetting what it's called, but the big sale type building with the town square.
Big tent.
It's going to be really sensational. It looks great, fully set up with a heap of exhibitors in it. We're going to have some stage presentations covering sort of the gamut of shooting interests. There's going to be a bit of a carnival atmosphere outside on the town square, and ticket sales are going really, really well. Early ticket sales are going off, so get yours today, I suppose, www.ssaavik.com.au/Shot Expo 2024. And David and Daryl, I assume you'll both be at Shot Expo?
Yes, we will. Yeah, we'll be there.
I assume even if you weren't being told by the boss you had to be there, you'd be there anyway.
I haven't missed one yet. I've represented various other people during the course, and I've been at every one. But yeah, I'd go anyway, even though I didn't have to. It's going to be a great day.
It should be great. There hasn't been anything like this in 5 years. It's going to be the biggest show in the Southern Hemisphere, and I know industry's got right behind it and really looking forward to showing products. So really looking forward to it. It's going to be great. Another big thing the association's been doing and growing is our training, and there's some new training courses on scope with the association's RTO.
Yeah, there certainly is. So as well as our firearms safety course and our practical firearms training and the duck and deer hunting courses that we run, we've got two new nationally recognised courses on scope. AMP GAM 303, to give it its official number, use firearms to safely and humanely harvest wild game. So that's the harvesting one, mainly for the kangaroo harvesters, but there's a deer component involved in that as well. And the other one's AHCPM G304, bit of a mouthful. Use firearms to humanely destroy animals, which is more of a broad sort of based one, more for general people who have to dispatch animals, either in farming situations. We get a lot of sort of wildlife organisations coming and doing that, or people who just want to increase their skills and knowledge on those issues.
That's great, and it's important that people are well trained in the use of firearms, and the association's perfectly positioned to play a leading role in that. Other thing that's going on at the moment is the annual hog deer ballots are now open for entries.
Yep, absolutely. So they're open now. You can get on the Blom Bay Hog Deer Advisory Group website and get tickets through there. ADA's partnered with the advisory group this year to coordinate the tickets. So, pretty easy to get online. They're $25 as they have been for the last few years. Really good opportunity to get involved in some public land hog deer hunting. Really, really good program, that one. Barry and I are both on it. We wear a number of hats. So we're here wearing our SSAA hats, but we're also both on that advisory group as well, sort of in independent sort of basis.
And all the money that goes into that ballot goes back into stuff to benefit hog deer. So none of it's administered by the government. It's administered by the volunteer advisory group and goes into things like improving facilities, improving habitat, potentially some hog deer research that we're looking at the moment. So every bit of that $25 donation goes back into helping the resource.
Yeah, we've certainly been trying to improve access onto Snake Island. So we've been talking to Parks Victoria and the traditional owners there about getting some of the tracks slashed to just make it a little bit easier for the hunters who end up over there.
Another thing we've been working on, I'd say recently, but another thing we've been working on for 70 years or so, and we'll be working on for the next 70 years or so, is public land access. An old friend of Daryl's always said there's sort of three things you need if you're going to be a hunter, and that's something to shoot, somewhere to shoot, and something to shoot with. So on that pyramid, the public land access seems to be one of the things that we're constantly having to advocate on. And there's currently work around the Central Highlands of Victoria, which is nothing new. We've been working on this, both SSAA Victoria and other hunting organisations have been working on this for over a decade. And it's important to note, I think, whilst that idea has not been killed of creating this great big new national park, it hasn't happened either. And over that decade, public land hunting access has grown for deer hunters over that time by about 500,000 hectares of public land. So it's not all doom and gloom, it's not all bad, and it's not like we're not achieving anything. The ultimate goal is to maintain the status quo and grow things, and we'll keep working on that. But there's a real importance of having that stable, considered advocacy in that space from these leading organisations. And I'm pretty proud to say that that's what is happening. There's a number of other people taking an interest in this issue at the moment, which is great, and they all have their roles to play. I'm not saying that we're right and they're wrong or vice versa, but different people have different roles to play in these issues, and the more people who are interested in how your government administers the things that are dear to you, I think is only a positive. There has been, unfortunately, some rumours floating around, and I'm loath to deal in rumours, but there's been these rumours that hunting organisations or a hunting organisation have sold out or done some sort of deal for exclusive access to this land. And you only have to look at the statements that the various hunting organisations have put out. And I mean, as recently as May this year, there was a joint statement put out by all of the leading hunting organisations in Victoria stating a vehement opposition to locking any of this land up, to know that those rumours are just absurd, they're stupid. And that's before you start to think about how such a thing would even practically work, which of course it wouldn't. So, like I said, fill your boots, advocate how you want to advocate, find what works for you and get involved in it. But it's quite divisive when people start dealing in rumours and in division amongst people who ultimately agree on the end goal, which is really good public access to public land.
Yeah, look, I think it's really telling that the major groups who were involved in this and put in a joint submission to Parliament and some joint communications on all this were the Australian Bowhunters Association, the Australian Deer Association, Sporting Shooters Association, Field and Game Association, the Gippsland Deer Stalkers and the Victorian Hound Hunters. So they're all your major sort of bodies that actually have membership and exist in sort of their own right. It's not some... what would you call them? Facebook-backed sort of groups that may have the best of intentions, but come out with a lot of things that don't really stand up to scrutiny.
So we'll move on from that to the main topic of today, which is the wildlife game regulations.
Small topic.
Just a small topic.
Take us 2 minutes to go through all this.
Well, it is a really important topic. These are the regulations that govern hunting for game animals, so for deer, duck, quail, and exotic game birds in Victoria. They sit underneath the Wildlife Act. So the Wildlife Act speaks in very general terms about there can be hunting. These regulations spell out how that hunting can occur. They were due to be reviewed in 2012. So every 10 years, regulations have what's called a sunset clause in them, which triggers those regulations to expire. They were due to be reviewed in 2012. That didn't happen. There was an election 2022, not 2012. There was an election in 2022, which got in the way, and then there was an inquiry into native bird hunting that also got in the way. So we're a couple of years down the track from that review. And without going too far into it, I think we're in a far better place now to have these conversations. It's actually pretty serendipitous that we had those delays because the atmosphere in government towards hunting a year, 2 years ago was probably not as favourable as it is now.
Yeah, I think that's spot on. I mean, I've been in my role for 7.5 years, dealt with a number of ministers over that time, and whilst we haven't all seen eye to eye on every issue, we found the engagement has been genuine. The immediately past minister would have to be, I think, in my view, the worst minister we've ever dealt with. The engagement was frankly abysmal, and I think we're in a much better position now dealing with the current minister.
Yeah, I have to agree with that, unfortunately. And you never want to be in that situation, and we always work to have a situation where, regardless of personal or ideological differences, we can work professionally with whoever happens to be in power, because that's not our gift who's going to be in power. That's the gift of the Victorian community. So it's for us to deal with whoever that may be. So there's been consultation on this. There was a fair bit of consultation back in 2021, but some of that's probably aged a bit. And then another round of consultation in May and June this year before what was called a regulatory impact statement came out, which laid out all of the issues that the government wanted to look at and perhaps review in these regulations. That was open for 30 days for public comment. That public comment period has now closed, and sometime between now and the 11th of September, the government will go through a process with their legal advisors, so the Office of the Chief Parliamentary Counsel, and they'll draft new regulations and they'll be put to the Governor for the last formal sign-off, which is called Royal Assent, through a Governor and Council process. So that's the mechanics of what's going to happen. And we're going to talk about what was in the regulatory impact statement, obviously, but it's also worth mentioning what was not in the 2024 regulatory impact statement, but is being looked at. So things like training for duck and quail hunters was part of the government's response to the Select Committee inquiry that they got handed down in late January this year. And that's going to take some time to shape up, but it's on the radar. It's not going to wait 10 years to be done. Similarly, stuff about training on cultural heritage is not going to wait 10 years to be done. And look, that's one that's probably attracted more attention than it needs, in my view. It's not an issue in and of itself. The challenge is that not that cultural heritage training would be a bad thing, but that the idea behind it hinges on a absolutely false premise that hunters pose some sort of notable risk to cultural assets, and that the risk posed by hunters is greater than the risk posed by any other land users. And I think what was really telling was that with the 2024 duck season, there was an activist group sent a dossier to just about everyone except for Santa Claus with a slew of allegations about all of this horrible hunter behaviour, including all this alleged damage to cultural heritage. When we went back to the regulators and asked them about that, there was one allegation reported to the regulators throughout the entire season, and that was investigated by the conservation regulator and by the traditional owners of that area. So it was an allegation that a hunter had cut up a scarred tree for firewood, and it was found that it wasn't a scarred tree that was cut up. Now, that hunter cut up firewood on a state game reserve, which you're not allowed to do, and was fined for that, and so they should be. But that does not then mean that hunters pose a significant threat to cultural heritage.
Yeah, they'll find under the state game reserve regulations, not the cultural heritage.
Yeah, which is probably something that some hunters don't understand. So in state forests, you can cut up firewood and have a fire in your camp, but on state game reserves, you can't do that.
Yeah, and we don't condone, of course, any breaking of any of the rules, but it's also, there are different degrees of seriousness of offending and different degrees of seriousness of rules, but ultimately ignorance of the rules is no excuse for breaking them. So we encourage people to make sure that they keep their noses extra clean, because we're always being looked at pretty closely.
Particularly around duck hunting, there's a lot of scrutiny, a lot of activists involved, and they're very keen to get video footage, and they're keen to use anything that they can against hunting and hunters. So be very aware of that. So
we got this regulatory impact statement that proposed a number of things, number of changes, as they do every 10 years when these things come out. They're a big picture look. And we took an approach that's guided by the association's strategies, its policy and its constitution on everything we do. And that's a long-winded way of saying we were guided by the core values that our members sign up to when they join the association. So amongst our cohort of 44,000 odd members, there were 44,001 different points of view on every
at least
on every particular issue in the RIS. But you could bring everyone together fairly broadly under the values they signed up for, and they continue to sign up for every year when they renew their membership. So that's what guides us when we do a response to these sorts of things. And then, of course, we're guided by the policies that's set by our elected board. We looked at how each proposal stacked up against three basic criteria, which again are just giving a bit of flesh on the bones to that basic concept of our shared values. So first we looked at, does the proposal best serve the game resource? Because there's not much point otherwise, right? The three of us here have got kids. The three of us here have an eye to the opportunities we're going to have in the future and that will be around long after we're gone. And the three of us here, I think it's fair to say, have gotten an awful lot out of this over the years. We've gotten so much out of hunting. I certainly have, personally, I've got some of the best friendships I've got, of some of the best experiences I've had, an awful lot out of hunting. So it has to be sustainable. We've got to leave that resource in a good position for the future. I think that's
number one priority.
It's number one priority, and I think that's reflective of the values of our 44,000 members.
And as you said before, the three fundamental things you need is something to hunt, somewhere to hunt, and something to hunt with. And we also need the permission, the regulatory permission to do it as well. So, but yeah, we need something to hunt is fundamental.
So the second thing, and it flows straight on, was, does the proposal best serve the long-term interests of game hunting? So again, we've got to have a look at how this thing looks in 10 years, who the hunters will be and how this is going to serve them, because this is, whilst there'll be tweaks to the regulations throughout the next decade, this is the big picture look at how they look in the next decade. So we have to have an eye to that. And the third one, which was to the point David made just before, does the proposal best serve the Victorian community? Because if we haven't got social licence, we don't exist. We only do what we do. It's whilst to us it's deeply important, it's a discretionary activity, and we continue doing that activity as long as the public allows us to continue doing that activity. So all of our responses to these regulations were looked at through that lens. Without any further ado, I suppose we'll get into what they were.
That lighthearted.
Lighthearted. Look, the first one was a proposal to ban the use of lead ammunition for all game hunting.
Yeah, probably the biggest issue that we've got. This has sort of been on the agenda for any number of years. It's obviously come to the fore. There was some talk about it prior to this, but there certainly wasn't clear that they were going to propose going to this extent. So we obviously did a lot of work involved with that. We surveyed our members. We also spoke with other industry experts. We had a meeting with the British Association of Shooting and Conservation, BASC, Dr. Conor O'Gorman. From over there. We had a really valuable meeting with him. This is something that they've been going through in the UK for a number of years. It's very topical over there. So we got some very good insights from him on how BASC has been approaching this and what some of the major sort of issues are.
Yeah, we also did a review of the scientific evidence that was in the RIS, and I think it's fair to say that it was fairly, in our view, quite narrow and lacking.
And biased.
And, well, there you go. and biased.
I'll say it.
And it's not that, certainly within the team at State Office, but within our board that guides us and the association more generally, I don't think it's that anyone has a philosophical problem with transitioning away from using lead-based ammunition, but it's got to make sense, right? And it has to solve more problems than it creates.
I think we all understand that lead's toxic and we need to limit its use where we can. And I think we all support the transition to non-lead ammunition in the future, but we can't do that overnight. It's definitely a transition.
And when you say we can't do that overnight, so you two have done a bit of stuff on the practical implications of that.
Yeah, look, we've done a little bit. We've shot a lot of the available hunting ammunition that's around at the moment. and definitely found some holes, some things that we need to change. There's definitely some changes in firearms and technology. What works for lead doesn't work for copper, we found out pretty quickly, but we found that out, when we did the whole stuff with steel shot as well. We've done a lot of work, especially in the last 10 years. I've done a lot of work with steel shot, with shotgun shooting. We found that there's definitely differences between lead and steel. And with the rifle ammunition going from lead to copper, there's a massive difference, and we need to work with that. It's going to take some time to work out what those differences are and how we solve some problems.
Yeah, look, there's no doubt copper can be effective in the right circumstances, but there seems to be quite a few circumstances where it's not going to be as effective as your traditional lead-based bullets. And given that it's taken literally hundreds of years to get to the technological advances that we've got with lead bullets, it's obviously going to take a while for copper bullets to sort of meet up or match up with that. You've got issues with rifling twist rates, which is one thing that we found with the accuracy. So, we got some good results, but then we got some really abysmal results with accuracy with copper. And that's what we're sort of putting it down to. I think there's a few other bits and pieces there. But as Barry said, I don't think anyone's philosophically opposed to transitioning as it becomes possible and as all these issues are addressed. But the RIS is focusing on one particular issue, and they're talking about lead as being a contaminant and bad in the environment. But they haven't really looked at any of those other things. They haven't looked at the availability of alternative ammunition. They haven't looked at the cost. They haven't looked at the efficacy of it either. And we're talking about the science before. Most of this has been based on one or two papers, and we have some serious concerns about those papers, and we've got some expert scientific interpretation of those as well that has come to the same sort of conclusion. Most people would have seen a particularly graphic picture of a hog deer that was shot with a lead bullet, and there's fragmentation right through the animal. So we actually did some research and found out what bullet was used, and it was a 135 grain varmint bullet out of a 30-06 caliber firearm. They are designed to fragment and explode and blow up and on a particularly small animal. So that was certainly not indicative of what we'd expect with any sort of fragmentation in your standard sort of hunting bullets.
When we're talking about efficacy, it's not a ego thing. It's not I'm a great guy, I managed to hit a target thing. When we're talking about efficacy, we're talking about animal welfare. We're talking about the difference between a wounded deer that goes off and suffers and dies and succumbs from its injury sometime later, or a deer that is effectively instantly killed. That's primarily the concern when we're talking about efficacy, is not that I'm going to miss out on the trophy of a lifetime, or I'm not going to feel great because I like to hit targets really, really tight. It's about animal welfare. It's about wounding deer.
Yeah, because there's a lot we're going to work through with that. As I say, copper bullets can be really effective, but generally the further the range and the lower the velocity of copper, the less it actually expands. So you end up with a projectile that's actually acting like a full metal jacket. So it's not doing what it needs to do to impart that energy and the damage to the vital organs of the animal.
So looking at all of the issues that were presented in the regulatory impact statement, effectively, it's fair to say, SSAA Victoria, we came to the conclusion that the proposal for the government for a transition at a set time, the juice wasn't worth the squeeze. There was too much to lose for what we stood to gain from that. But we also accepted the fact that this is a very live conversation, that there are transitions and discussions about transitions happening everywhere. And we tried to take a pragmatic look at what the government was trying to achieve by adding this into the regulatory impact statement and addressing this issue of lead ammunition in deer hunting, and tried to propose a credible, workable alternative to them. So give them somewhere else to go, rather than say, it's easy to say, no, we're against it. But unless you give people somewhere else to go, I've found over the years that's not a very effective way of stopping things, or not a very effective way of stopping them for long. Things come back. This issue is an issue that is going to keep coming back. And our view was that we've got the choice of it coming back and us being in a position to shape how it moves forward, or at some point, and to our earlier discussion about having a relatively friendly, or at least open discussion with government at the moment, we're realistically one change of minister, one change of premier away from who knows if the next election delivers a government with a Greens minority or anything like that. So this was our opportunity to say, right, it is an issue. We don't think you've got it right, but here's the alternative. So we propose there be a working group, and we propose terms of reference for that working group to really guide how this issue shapes up going forward. And we're quite hopeful. Probably by the time you listen to or watch this podcast, you'll know if our hopes were well held or not, but we're quite hopeful that that's the way it will go going forward.
Yeah, because if we look at the overseas experience, regardless of what people think about this, it's not an issue that's going away. So we do need to address it and look at it and try and find a pragmatic and workable way forward.
Sure. Another transition that was proposed in the RIS, on which we took a somewhat different approach, but which I think it's fair to say has about the same amount of, has less scientific evidence behind it, it's the transition to non-toxic shot for quail hunting.
Yeah, and I think the RIS mentions the UK experience, and they've been looking at over there and talking about their voluntary transition away from lead shot. The fact is that what Victorian quail hunters are putting into the environment is less than 1% of what's going into the UK environment every year. So it's obviously a much bigger issue over there. So it's probably been overblown here. So yeah, we don't think there's the scientific evidence to suggest that it is a big problem that needs addressing. But the government came out with the parliamentary inquiry and said this was what they were going to do, and it was one of the requirements for game bird hunting to continue in the state. So whilst we don't really like it, we also wouldn't like a government that goes back on what they say. So yeah, we've sort of tried to come to a pragmatic approach, and once again they suggest a transition period because they wanted to bring it in straight away. We've come back with a proposal that it's transitioned over time, so public land and then private property over several years to enable people to get the ammunition they need, because that's an issue as well that we're finding that a lot of this stuff's not available. So we need to give hunters an opportunity to transition and get what they need to be able to continue doing what they're doing.
Yeah, look, it's similar to the lead bullet thing. We can't just swap overnight. This stuff isn't available. It is available overseas and it could be available here, but at the moment it's not. And the suggestion was just to change, September the 15th or whatever the date was in September. We'll just draw a line and everyone has to use steel shot after that day. Well, it's not here. Yes, there's some available in various parts of Europe and some available in the US, but someone has to bring that in and stock it and get it to shops and get it on shelves, and people have to learn how to use it. So yeah, the suggestion was, again, another phase in or a transition period. And I think that's a workable outcome. It was one of the recommendations of the Select Committee. It is a commitment of government. They signed up to it, so it's going to happen. We just have to steer it the direction it's going in and try and stay in front of it.
And whilst, it's the government has committed to it, there is no urgency for this change. There's no scientific urgency for this change. There's no animal welfare urgency for this change. I think we said in our submission that it's rooted in political science, not ecological or biological science. So it would make sense to stage a transition.
We'll see how we go on that one. We've made the suggestion and right. we'll see what they come back with.
We can but advocate. Another thing that was in the RIS that is something that we actually proposed in principle. I hate using that term because it's often overused in our sector, but something we proposed was legalising artificial water points for hog deer, or clarifying that artificial water points for hog deer are legal. So the way the RIS handled this, in my view, couldn't have been more ham-fisted, confused, or upside down.
Oh, absolutely. It's a complete mess, a complete misunderstanding of what the intention of that was. Basically, the intent was just to clarify that water points for hog deer and other wildlife are not actually a lure or a bait under the regulations. Fairly straightforward. Hog deer in the Gippsland area, water is a significantly limiting factor, and the idea on a few private properties down there have actually put in water points for the for the deer. Sunday Island, Para Park, has done that extensively, and it's actually a welfare issue for the deer. So instead of in those dry times drinking salt water, which can affect their kidneys and has adverse health effects, they're actually getting fresh water. There's been some concerns put about that it actually concentrates hog deer, and I think the RIS talked about that. It actually does the opposite because you're dispersing them around a number of sort of water sources rather than a single one. So there was a complete misunderstanding of what the intent was. So we've come back and said, well, better off to leave it alone and just leave things as they are if it's going to be like that. Otherwise, just change the definitions, and that should sort of solve all our issues there.
And it's an example of how some of these things can go when they're in the hands of people who, and you don't expect the people who are drafting these things to be experts on the detail of, this week they'll probably be doing a regulatory impact statement on, I don't know, the upfield train line or something. So you don't expect them to be an expert on every topic.
No, but that's where that consultation with industry, and in this case us and the other hunting groups, and meaningful consultation whilst they're drafting these and in the lead up, to actually understand the nuance of these and what we're actually looking for and what it's involved.
So ultimately our response on the water points was we proposed, as David said, either just remove your proposal altogether and we'll deal with the issue a different way if and when it comes up, or the preferred position is to make it simple in the definitions section of the regulations, just explicitly point out that artificial water points are not a bait or lure.
Yeah.
Sometimes the answer to these things is not complicated, sometimes it's simplicity itself.
And as you were saying, the bureaucrats who draft up these things aren't sort of subject matter experts, and that's why we want them to consult with us in a meaningful way, sort of early on in this process, to make sure that they actually understand the nuance and what we're trying to achieve with these types of recommendations.
Another one that's attracted a lot of interest is what people have been saying is a removal of blue-winged shoveler, Australasian shoveler, Daryl, from the game list. It's actually not. The proposal is not to remove Australasian shoveler from the game list, although it would have the same practical effect. So it's to keep them on the game list, but remove any open season for blue-winged shoveler.
Yes, a shoveler would remain on the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act, which is limiting their ability to be hunted. So they would remain on the game list. They just wouldn't be in the season setting. So they would be on the game list, but they wouldn't be available for hunting during that period.
Similar to snipers, still on the game list, but they're still on the game list after 20 or 30 years, whatever it is, but there's been no hunting of them in that time. And
yeah, while they remain on the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act, they won't be hunted. So same deal with snipe.
And look, it's reasonable to speculate that had this RIS been done 6 months ago, they'd have been removing an open season for hardhead as well.
Oh, no doubt about it.
Yeah.
It'd be exactly the same boat.
So why aren't they removing an open season for hardhead?
because there you go, Daryl, you can talk about this one.
To the Fauna and Fauna Guarantee Act, and we challenged the position of the listing as a threatened or endangered species. Went through a process of, I think it was 2 years in the end, wasn't it?
Yes.
2 years of meetings, the Scientific Advisory Committee, and that nomination was accepted and was removed from the Fauna and Fauna Guarantee Act threatened species list. So hardhead are no longer listed, which was what was preventing them from being hunted. So they'll remain on the game list and they'll remain on the hunting list. So they'll be available to hunt.
That's not just important for hunting. It's important, I think, for the integrity of the Scientific Advisory Group and the Flora and Fauna Guarantee Act lists that species that shouldn't be on there because they're more abundant than the triggers required to be on there are not on there.
Yeah, so the challenge was around why they were listed in the first place, and they were listed during a millennium drought, which showed their numbers were decreasing significantly in Victoria and they were in very low numbers. Well, yes, that's correct. It was a millennium drought. So the whole premise of the listing was that it was going to continue on, and well, we all know it rained in 2010, 2011, 2012, and the world changed for waterfowl, and the numbers have come back to where they were previously. So that was the challenge of that listing. Be nice. I've already heard though, why can't we do the same with blue-winged shoveler? Because blue-winged shoveler haven't shown the same resilience.
But there is a there is a precedent for wildlife, and look, it's not exactly an apples for apples comparison. Or maybe it's an apples for, I'm trying to think of a fruit that's really similar to an apple. Maybe it's a Granny Smith or Jazz comparison.
We're going red and green.
With some fish species that we made in our submission to the inquiry.
Yeah,
the inquiry to the RAS, sorry.
So it's interesting that they're using the listing on the FFG Act for for blue-winged shoveler to prevent hunting, whereas we've got both Murray cod and southern bluefin tuna are on that same list. Murray cod are actually at a higher level of risk than blue-winged shoveler. So that's interesting in itself, and it shows that with proper management and bag limits and take limits and whatever else you need, you can actually have a sustainable take from species that are listed as threatened without threatening the actual overall sustainability of that species. And our view is that they should be able to do exactly the same with blue-winged shoveler. We're moving towards adaptive harvest management, and that's a really good opportunity to get that nuance in the bags and make sure that a take can be set that won't actually impact on their sustainability. There might be some seasons where there is no take, but it needs to be judged on its merits and done objectively instead of just in a subjective sort of view that, they're on this list, so therefore there can be no utilisation.
I think you hit the nail on the head with the word management. What management? There's no management. So, yeah, there's been some papers written about blue-winged shoveler, Australasian shoveler, Barry.
Australasian shoveler, Daryl.
Can you correct me? I always correct you. And yeah, there's a whole pile of management options, but those options none of those things are being done. We are starting to see that change though. So some research is being done, some tracking and monitoring is being done. The first recommendation was to remove them from the list, so that sort of happened instantly, but all these other management things haven't happened, but we're starting to see some changes, which is fantastic.
The changes we're seeing are predominantly around shoveler being a game species.
Correct. It's being done by the Game Management Authority, and if they're not a game bird, the research isn't being done. They'll go back to where they were. And
that point was made. I was in a meeting a few years ago where someone was making a point about doing the GMA, the Game Management Authority, doing research into the freckled duck, and the answer was we can't. We're not allowed to because they're not a game species.
Correct. And when was the last time research was done on freckled ducks?
60s or 70s, I think. So it's a long time.
They were last hunted the year I was born, I believe, and
yeah, that's about right.
Not as young as I once was.
Didn't think you were that old, Barry.
He's old.
Oh, yeah, I'm getting there. I'm not as old as you, but I'm still old. So our ultimate submission was that you can handle this through adaptive harvest, that there can be a bit more nuance embraced, and that's the whole point of the changes that have been made in duck hunting, so we'll see where that lands. Another one that's always popular is fees for game licences.
Talk to me about money,
Barry. No one wants to pay more. I understand that.
I don't want to pay more. Why should we pay more?
Who wants to talk about this one? No one wants to talk about this one.
I'd love to.
All of it. Look, everyone's paying more for everything. We're doing a discretionary activity, as I said earlier. It might not be discretionary to us, but as far as the community sees it, it's discretionary. And it was pointed out that there's an attack that's commonly used on us is that we don't pay our own way, that we don't pay the way of being regulated, of conducting this activity, that we're a net drain on society, none of which I necessarily agree with, but it's also fantastic if we can knock that argument out altogether too.
Oh, even within the hunting community, I constantly hear, what does the government do with the big pool of money they get from hunting licences? Well, there's no big pool of money. In fact, it's the licence fees don't cover the running of the department, and that's our issue.
They don't, and we put it into we had to look at the historical context for this. So 1958, when the licence came in, it was the princely sum of £1 for a licence. That would give you a licence to hunt ducks, and that was about 5% of what the average person would earn in a week. And the proposals in the RIS bring it back to about 5% of what the average person would earn in a week. It's a bit under that now. And look, it's bounced around over the decades. In 1990, it was 1.5%. It was $7 for a game licence in 1990. And in 1991, which I think those of us who are even older, Dave might remember State Bank and Pyramid Building Society.
Remember all
those.
those, yes.
All of those.
I'm really dating myself then.
Victoria's not in a great position at that time. So they went from $7 one year to $25 the next. It's not unprecedented, and the proposal's not for a bounce like that right now.
And look, I think the important thing about the historical context is too that it was hunters who actually pushed for that introduction of a licence fee, for that money to go back into sort of research and management of ducks, and to go into purchasing the state game reserves at that stage. So, which is where we've sort of come to our position on this one. It's likely that fees will go up anyway. So we've suggested the formation of a fund that basically takes that increase and puts it directly back into management and research into game species, so benefiting the resource that we all rely on.
And look, I'm hopeful that proposal will be taken up by government, but I'm not going to hold my breath.
When it comes to money and governments, no.
So just talking on the numbers, people keep asking me, how much is a game licence? How much is it going to cost me? So a duck or a deer licence currently $65.30. The proposal is $88.80, so 36% increase. And for a duck and deer licence, $98 currently up to $150, so a 53% increase. So the big increase is for those of us that hold both licences, which a large proportion of us do. We're going to see a 53% increase. Look, I hunt overseas. I spent some time in North America and I spent a lot of time in New Zealand. When I tell people what we pay to hunt here, they kind of laugh. What do you mean? That's all? It's like, yeah, that's all. It's still $150 for access to hunt deer and ducks and quail across Victoria is a pretty good deal still, I think.
And that's not to trivialise that people are struggling with cost of living.
It's still a lot of money.
It's still a lot of money, but
for the privilege.
That's where it's going. So another thing that's been a source of controversy is probably going a bit too far, but there's certainly been polarisation on the issue of allowing handheld thermal devices on public land for deer hunting.
That's an understatement.
Yeah, I think divisive is probably more accurate. Certainly we've got passionate people on both sides of this discussion. So we've looked at it and basically come to a position after consultation with the board, looking at all our policies, putting out member surveys. Baz put out some surveys, and we got some really interesting results from that. So effectively we're not supporting thermal scopes on firearms. There are a whole heap of issues from that. Putting aside sort of fair chase stuff and what's good for the game resource, just the safety aspects of people on public land with those types of devices we don't see as being particularly helpful, certainly not at this stage. Whereas a thermal binocular is completely different. We don't have the safety issues with that. And if people want to use it to help them locate game, particularly in the case of if they shoot an animal and lose it in thick scrub or something like that, to recover a lost animal or a wounded animal, there's certainly some benefits there for that.
So when you say we don't have the safety issues with a handheld, I mean, it's fairly self-evident, but let's spell it out. You're not using a handheld device to line up on something, assess the backdrop.
It's like having a scope on your rifle, but using binoculars. You should not be using a scope to actually identify your target because you're pointing the muzzle in a direction that you don't know is safe. Firearms rules, sort of the really basic stuff there. So you use your binoculars to identify your target. Then you put your scope on it and you take your shot. Same with a thermal handheld device. You can identify your target, but then you can actually use your standard scope to do that. Because thermal scopes, look, some of the high-end ones do give good definition. Some of the lower definition ones, you're basically seeing a blob. And for people to actually be looking through a scope ready to take a shot is not a good outcome.
Yeah, you're shooting at heat signatures and identification. You obviously lose all colour. Identification is really hard. Range estimation is really hard because you lose that depth perception.
You're looking at a flat picture.
Yeah, you're looking at a flat picture on a screen, which is two colours at best.
Yeah, and our brains are conditioned to actually look at things. So even a scope, you do get magnification and some foreshortening of the image and that depth perception, but you're still looking at things in a manner that your brain comprehends, whether you're using a scope or whatever.
You've still got two eyes. One's looking through the scope, and
and you're seeing the colour and the texture and all those sort of things as well. So we certainly acknowledge that there's wide-ranging views on this. And what we've got to remember too, this is for game hunting. So this is the game regulations. So we're not talking about pest species hunting. And this won't affect people who control deer on private property. They're still unprotected under that governor in council order. So people doing that will still be able to do it. This obviously is not going to impact on control operations, any of those organised things. So this is specifically for recreational hunting activities for game species.
Yeah, I'm quite comfortable with where the regulation has landed.
Yeah, I think it's a good outcome.
I totally understand the fair chase arguments, and I suppose my counter to that is if you don't want to use a thermal monocular, by all means don't use one.
No, it's not going to be compulsory. So
another one that came up in the regs, which was a tidy up, sort of trying to fix some administrative minutiae, was the closure of hound hunting over the Easter period. So since for the last 24 or 25 years, I suppose, there's been a closure of the hound hunting season. It didn't used to be a hound hunting season up until 24 or 25 years ago. And since it came in, there's been a closure over the Easter period, ostensibly to avoid conflict with other bush users. We tested this when we looked at the RIS just because, first and foremost, because we think every regulation should be tested. That's the whole point of reviewing them once every 10 years. And we also looked at whether or not having that closure for an entire week was at all proportionate. And we sort of came to the view that it's not. There wasn't a closure this year because of a quirk in the way the previous regulations were drafted that had that when Easter falls in April, there'll be a closure. And of course, Easter Sunday fell in May, but the Easter weekend still managed to come into April. So just an oddity. And the sky didn't fall in, and there wasn't an outbreak of antisocial behaviour, and there weren't campers picketing one Spring Street when they got back on the Tuesday morning to say these terrible hound hunters ruined my Easter. So we've
zero reported incidents.
Zero reported incidents. It wasn't an issue. It's not likely to be an issue. But so we put forward basically that we don't believe it's a proportionate regulatory response. It singles out a single form of hunting. And we also put forward that even if you do accept that there is some rationale to closing hound hunting over Easter, society has decided that Easter is the days that are gazetted public holidays, not an entire week that was arbitrarily decided by a bureaucrat a quarter of a century ago for one particular form of hunting. So our argument has been if you're going to keep it in, make it the main public holidays and don't impose an unnecessary burden on a particular form of hunting when you don't even really understand why you're doing it.
Yeah, and that's the important thing. I mean, we advocate on behalf of our members to have hunting opportunities, and where those opportunities need to be limited for genuine reasons, we don't have a problem with that. But in this case, there's been no demonstration that there's a genuine reason, and as we saw this year, there were no issues. So yeah, if it's not necessary, why restrict people from going hunting?
Another one that came from left field, although it would not be the most left field thing in the RIS, was flexibility of dog breeds for duck hunting. There's a diversity of views on this. Ultimately, being consistent with the flexibility that the government's got for deer hunting. So what this says is that breeds that are not listed as gun dog breeds for duck hunting can still be allowed to be used by duck hunters with permission of GMA on a case-by-case basis. The thing we did point out in our submission on that was that there needs to be some sort of criteria or guidelines published on how the GMA will come to that decision. At the moment, it's completely opaque. And the fear is that it sets, that it's potentially unfair and arbitrary because nobody knows what the broad criteria and guidelines are, and that it could set a really unrealistic expectation that someone could go out and spend what nowadays is thousands of dollars on a dog and spend months and months training and putting time into that dog and have that dog knocked back for use because someone said so. And whilst we support that level of flexibility, there needs to be some sort of basic guidelines around that flexibility. Another one that is controversial, and certainly when we looked at seasons being run with an 8 a.m. start for the entire season was terrible, but the regulations are looking to impose an 8 a.m. start for the first 5 days of duck hunting. Daryl, you're the duck guy. Tell us why it's so terrible.
Oh, the duck guy. I don't know where to start with this one, Barry. Look, there's been a push definitely by RVODs and various other organisations to limit 8 a.m. starts for the entire duck season. It started off, we originally got it during the Saturday and Sunday of opening weekend, which then moved to a Wednesday, and then it became Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Saturday. Now it's become 5 days. What are we trying to achieve, and what's the background behind it? Why? What problems are we trying to solve here? And no one's quite going to tell me that. And it's got to the point now where just people that live nearby don't like the sound of gunfire.
Which was not when this came in 2019.
Yep.
I believe the rationale then was a compliance rationale, and the fact that that's now drifted. This proposition put by the regional Victorians opposed to duck shooting about public amenity, and it's just nonsense.
Yeah, I didn't want to go through I can't go through a podcast without mentioning Karangi, but I think we know the basis of all these decisions were made around what happened at Karangi in 2017. The original idea was to move to 8 o'clock for better identification of game species by hunters and also better identification of hunters by the regulators. How we got out to 5 days, I'm not sure.
No, so we've proposed again a bit of a compromise in our response.
Okay, so our proposal was, because government seems to be really committed to this, to make sure that the enforcement side of things can identify hunters. We've suggested sunrise. It's light enough then. Those who go duck hunting realise that by 8 o'clock it's pretty much all over. So sunrise seems to be that reasonable sort of compromise for those first few days of the season, and then we can go back to that half an hour before sunrise. We do know that most of our issues happen in that opening weekend. After that, we tend to get I don't know if I should say serious duck hunters, but the people who sort of hunt on a regular basis, and we definitely know the stats tell us that we don't have issues then. So it's really trying to get through that opening sort of weekend and few days, get over any issues, and then just get on with things as per normal.
I hope you're not suggesting that duck hunting starts on the Monday after opening.
I would not suggest that, but most of the serious duck hunters that I know, they're certainly out and about then.
And that half hour before sunrise, which has been in the regulation forever, has a real practical grounding. I think in particular if you're hunting those coastal swamps of Gippsland, that's when you've got your best hunting opportunity.
8 a.m. is all right.
If you wait until 8 a.m, then your hunting's done until 5 minutes before the sun goes down, basically.
Yeah, correct. And if you look at, again, I talked about North America and New Zealand, but you look at their starting times and in Europe as well, generally that 30 minutes before sunrise is the time to be out there hunting. Most of your game species, not just ducks, same thing with deer.
Yeah. Pushing on from that, but in the same vein, on the same topic, is the Wednesday duck opening that the RAS is proposing to enshrine, which again has been in place since 2019.
Yeah, so we've seen that move. Obviously the regs haven't changed, but we've seen modifications to the season every year since then. To move it to a Wednesday, it's been a bit, what's the right word, contentious. Some people support it, some people don't support it. We've surveyed our membership and we've got a pretty good idea how our members feel about it. But yeah, the proposal is to put that into regulation. So our suggestion is, if that's going to go into the regulation, that we don't go the Wednesday after the formal opening weekend, we go the Wednesday before, so we bring it forward a week, not back.
Which actually just gives hunters greater opportunity to get out there and hunt and do what they enjoy doing.
Those that can make it on a Wednesday, make it on the Wednesday, and those who can't can go to their traditional weekend hunt, the traditional weekend hunting opening.
Yeah, and look, it is. I think there is a bit of that tradition that gets lost for people, and I think that's worth acknowledging. It's not nothing. It's not trivial.
I grew up. My father took 2 weeks off in the first 2 weeks of the duck season my entire childhood, so I grew up going on those trips, those family trips with like-minded individuals and family members. So yeah, I certainly understand that multi-generational traditions.
I mentioned that the additional dog breeds for duck hunting was not the most left field proposal in the game regs.
Oh, we're not going to.
We're going to decoys.
Deer decoys were the most
Blaze orange deer decoys.
The blaze oranges are really
deer decoys was the most left field
bizarre
proposal.
stuff. So I'm not sure where this came from. Obviously, deer decoys are used overseas in some areas, apparently without issue. Look, I can see some benefits for it. If you can bring deer out into an open area and have a clear, unobstructed shot at them for a humane outcome, that's likely to be effective. Blaze, yeah, not quite sure. We're going to dress up our deer decoys in blaze. I don't know whether they're concerned that the decoy is going to be shot or the hunter who's near the decoy is going to be shot. I'm not sure about that one. Blaze is an interesting thing. We certainly encourage people. It doesn't hurt to be seen and to wear blaze if you're hunting. But hunters cannot expect to see blaze. You're responsible for identifying your target. There's a whole heap of other bush users out there. They don't wear blaze. So it's something that hunters shouldn't be expecting to see. So I certainly wouldn't want to be seeing it mandated on decoys. I think this one is quite out of left field and quite bizarre. There was really no explanation in the RIS as to why, how, whatever. So, we might have to throw back to the drafters of this to find out what their actual intent was.
Another one that's not uncontroversial, but that has been in place for a few years is enshrining into regulation a ban on acoustic quail callers.
Yeah, look, the acoustic quail callers, we haven't had a problem with that. We put out comms on this a couple of years ago. All the feedback that we got from the quail hunters within our organisation was that quail callers, one of the quotes was, it causes quail to not act like quail. It basically, they go out in advance, they congregate quail into a relatively small area, and the hunter comes along knowing that there's going to be quail there, and they can bag out fairly easily. Significantly different to duck callers, which have got lumped into this as well for some reason. Duck callers, whether electronic or manual, simply are used to attract a bird into the hunter's decoy spread and bring them within an effective shooting range. They don't congregate the birds there prior, so we don't think that the duck decoy or the duck callers should be mixed in with this. Quail callers, yeah, we haven't got a big problem with them going how they have on this.
So the drafting was that banning electronic callers for duck and quail, and the association's ultimate submission was that we support the banning of them for quail, but not for duck.
Yeah, they have a completely different impact on the species and how they interact with it. So.
Yeah, the electronic duck callers are only added in 2012, in the last round of regulations, and I don't see the world has changed much in the last 10 years or 12 years with duck hunting. I don't think the use of electronic duck callers has made any difference, to tell the truth. In fact, I think it's probably made some hunters less effective. That's all right. Yeah. And I don't see any need to ban them. There are some hunters that use them and do use them effectively, and I think they should still have the ability to do so, because they certainly don't, congregate mobs of birds like a quail caller can potentially do.
And that's probably all of the major things in the RS. There are a few little things. There was a proposal to declare a couple of new local government areas as deer habitat. So this is effectively a regulation that's been in place to allow authorised officers to book people for spotlighting without having to catch them physically in the act of shining a spotlight in a deer's eye and putting a firearm up on it. The association opposed this declaration of a couple of new LGAs because it's not a regulation that's without consequence. It does place an imposition on people who are off fox hunting and hunting pest species and all sorts of things. And effectively, the RAS just didn't make the case for the change. And it's not that they couldn't have, and had they done, it's very probable that we would have accepted their case for change. But we expect these documents, these once every 10-year reviews, to take a proper look, to take a critical look at all of the regulations, and particularly if they're proposing something new, to provide a firm rationale for it.
Yeah, and with this one, they provided no rationale at all. It was basically they just wanted to introduce 2 new areas, and that was it. So
there are a number of other things in the RAS that were not in the RAS that it didn't consider that we argued that it should, and will continue to argue that it should. Realistically, given the timeframes, I doubt that we'll see any of those arguments taken up in the near future, but we have been assured that whilst this is the big review for once a decade, good ideas don't have to wait a decade, and regulations get tweaked pretty well almost annually. There's omnibus bills in front of the Parliament all the time, and there's chances to tweak regulations. And there will be changes, as we foreshadowed earlier, to do with training coming into these regulations anyway, so they will be cracked open again in the next couple of years.
We're certainly going to see some changes, so we won't see these adopted and set in stone for the next 12 months. There will certainly be some changes.
But there's things that we advocated for, and we spoke with our colleagues in other hunting organisations, and that's things like allowing black and tan coon hounds and blue tick coon hounds, allowing 8 hounds in a hound pack regardless of hound age. So at the moment you can have 5 mature dogs and 3 pups in training, and the argument is that it should really be at the discretion of the people who are keeping the hound pack what the pack dynamics are.
If it's 8, it's 8.
If it's 8 dogs, it's 8 dogs. You shouldn't have to suddenly get rid of 3 effective dogs because they've hit an arbitrary age. There's an argument to increase the height allowance for harriers, and I must say Victorian Hound Hunters put in a submission that was well researched and well backed by references and credible evidence, and hats off to them for the work they did on that. So we've supported that. An argument that we put forward to extend the hog deer season by a month.
Yeah, the April season's been in for a long time. It was fairly arbitrarily set when it was brought in. Obviously, things have changed. We want to see opportunities for hunters to get out there and hunt. Duck season has a big impact on hog deer hunting down in Gippsland. So, the deer pretty much go nocturnal with all the disturbance that comes in when duck season commences before the April season. So to extend it out to 2 months would give the hog deer hunters an opportunity to experience those areas before they get disturbed. And our understanding is it won't significantly increase the take, but it will significantly increase the opportunities for hunters to get out there, and that's
and
as an
particularly
organisation.
that public land hunting opportunity. It provides more access, more real access for hunters to have a crack on public land, which means that everybody gets a fair shake at it.
Yeah, that doesn't mean everyone's going to be successful. They are difficult to hunt, but it gives them that opportunity to get out there. And there's 1 month season, given that most people work, they've potentially got sort of 4 weekends. So this way they'd have a significant amount more time.
And the other one on hog deer, which was again around giving the hunters more opportunity, was moving from a male and female tagged harvest to an antlered and antlerless tagged harvest.
Yeah, so this is something that's done overseas fairly extensively. So rather than the male-female, antlered, antlerless, we've got an issue in Victoria where they've got the 2 tags. We know that there's a significant bias in the take of males to females, and there's probably a number of reasons for that, but part of it is because hunters are concerned that if they shoot an antlerless deer and it turns out to be a young male, they've effectively used their stag tag, or after they've taken a stag and there's an antlerless deer and they shoot it and it turns out to actually be a young male, they've committed an offence. So this way just makes it really clear, very easy to identify, and should allow hunters to actually take some more deer. And
We've got a working example of this. So a couple of us are involved in Sunday Island Para Park, which is overseas. It's a corner in Let's Sea.
Another hat that we wear.
Another hat that we wear. And the last couple of years we've been running antlered, antlerless rather than male-female harvest, and it has resulted in hunters having a shot. Yeah. Shooting a deer because they're not worried about using their male tag and they're going home with venison.
Yeah, and I think that they're much more relaxed in their hunting. They're not concerned about shooting the wrong thing, so they're actually enjoying their hunting more. So I think this could be a good opportunity to do this across the state.
Right, so as we said at the start, from here the the minister's considering the feedback, and we've been lobbying the minister and the premier's office since we put our submission in pretty hard on our issues, as I think our members and the broader hunting community would expect us to be doing, and we'd expect our opponents are doing the same. I'd be surprised. I wouldn't say I'd be disappointed in them if they were, but I'd be surprised if they weren't.
They are.
I'm sure they are. And as they should. It's a legitimate thing for people to be doing in our society. So these things will be drafted and they'll be in place by the 11th of September, so pretty soon. And as we said, the other thing is that, there will be more changes and they'll be coming fairly soon. The association, beyond this, we've got plenty of work to do, of course. There's always another issue around the corner. That big public land access issue is not going away. Plenty of stuff with firearm regulation is not going away. We'll continue our proactive work in Parliament House. So in November, we've got our second game meat barbecue for MPs. So the first one we did last year was a huge success, supporting the Hunters for the Hungry initiative. And then we backed that up in May this year by running the first ever responsible hunting expo in Parliament House, which had great support. We had Victorian Amateur Pistol Association, Field and Game and the ADA came and joined us in taking over Queen's Hall of Parliament for a week. We had the Premier come in and show her support and the opposition leader show his support. We had our relevant minister and shadow ministers and Jeff Borman from the Shooters, Fishers and Farmers stand up on the stage at our lunch and give an address, all talking about their support for law-abiding, appropriate, responsible shooting and hunting in this state. I think the one exception who didn't drop in during the week was, we thought they hadn't dropped in, was the leader of the Greens, who walked through the lunch and took a selfie of herself at the lunch with a frown on her face, saying how horrible it was that a interest group had been allowed into the parliament in a democracy. How dare interest groups get into parliament in democracy and advocate for their causes, which was a bit silly, really. And it wasn't, there were vegan members of the parliament who stopped by and had vegan sandwiches at the lunch, and it was all very inclusive, but they're allowed to be silly.
We'll make no comment to that, Barry.
Anything either of you gents want to add before we wind up? We're in a new studio here in Collingwood that is 200 metres from the Stomping Ground Brewery, and it is a Friday afternoon as we record.
No, I guess the comments for me would just be around, these regulations will be in effect for the next year's duck and quail season as well as hog deer season. Expect some changes in the future. This training stuff is not going to go away. There's a commitment made by government and they're in the process of doing some trial work at the moment, so we can expect to hear some stuff about that over the next couple of years. So I think we're in for a bit of a change this year, but we could probably see some more in the next couple of years as well. So watch this space. Yes,
we're never bored. There is always something going on, but I suppose the membership can rest assured that we are taking a proactive approach on as many of those issues as we possibly can. We're in Parliament on a very regular basis, making those relationships and making people aware of some of the issues. So it's ongoing. We don't always get everything that we want, but we're certainly in there representing your interests as best as we possibly can to make sure that there's a future for hunting and shooting in this state.
Make sure you subscribe to us on the podcasting app you're listening to us on right now or on YouTube, and come along to Shot Expo on 19-20 October this year and have a chat with us face to face.